He worked 18-hour days well into his late 90s. He skipped lunch regularly. He never held a gym membership. And yet, Shigeki Hinohara didn't just survive to 103. He was actively seeing patients, publishing books, and running a hospital foundation until the very final chapter of his life. Here's what makes that worth paying attention to. He wasn't a monk living in a mountain village. He was one of the most studied physicians in modern Japanese medicine. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why almost everything you've been told about longevity is either overcomplicated, misattributed to genetics, or built around selling you something. Before we get into what he did, you need to understand who he actually was. Hinohara was the physician who coined the term lifestyle-related disease back in 1978. Decades before that phrase entered mainstream medical vocabulary, he spent over 70 years studying the connection between how humans live and how long they live, not as a theorist, but as a practicing clinician who saw thousands of patients throughout his career. This matters because his personal habits weren't accidental. They were the deliberate, informed choices of someone who had watched, up close, what slowly killed people and what quietly kept them alive. Now let's address the genetics question immediately, because you're already thinking it. Research consistently shows that genetics accounts for roughly 25% of a person's lifespan. The other 75% is shaped by behavior, environment, and mindset. Hinohara's life isn't a lottery ticket. It's a case study in what lifestyle compounding looks like when you apply it consistently over 100 years. That framing changes everything. The first principle sounds almost insultingly simple, and that's exactly why most people dismiss it before giving it a chance. Hara Hachibu, eat until you're 80% full. This isn't a diet. It's not a calorie system. It doesn't require an app, a food scale, or a subscription. What it requires is paying attention to a signal. Most of us have been trained since childhood to completely ignore the difference between satisfied and stuffed. Here's the biology. Your stomach sends a satisfied signal to your brain, but there's a lag time of roughly 15 to 20 minutes between when you've eaten enough and when your brain actually registers it. Which means if you eat until you feel full, you have already, by definition, overeaten every time. The 80% rule is essentially a workaround for this biological delay. You stop at satisfaction, a feeling, not a measurement, and you trust that the signal will catch up in the minutes that follow. Hinohara's own eating pattern was not dramatic. Vegetables, fish, and rice made up the bulk of his diet. Meat appeared roughly twice a week. Breakfast was coffee, milk, orange juice, and a tablespoon of olive oil consumed quickly, without ceremony. He frequently minimized or skipped lunch entirely. Some nutritionists raise a fair concern. Skipping meals can affect blood sugar regulation, particularly for people with metabolic conditions or physically demanding jobs. That's worth acknowledging. But the broader lesson here isn't skip lunch. It's stop treating every meal like an event. Moderation and intentionality, not restriction, is what carried him forward. Food was fuel. That relationship alone separates him from most of the modern world. This might be the most relieving thing you hear today. Hinohara never had a gym membership. No yoga class, no spin routine, no structured workout program of any kind. What he did do, without exception, was take the stairs. Every time, and he took them 2 steps at a time. That sounds almost comically simple, but unpack what's actually happening biomechanically, and it becomes far more interesting. Taking stairs 2 steps at a time forces a longer stride, which engages the glutes and hip flexors more completely than a standard step. It requires a brief moment of single leg balance and coordination with each stride that a normal step does not demand. Over years, over decades, this micro demand on the neuromuscular system maintains exactly the kind of leg strength and proprioception that directly prevents falls. And falls are one of the leading causes of death and severe injury in adults over 65. The ability to prevent them comes down almost entirely to leg strength and balance, both of which the 2-step method quietly addresses without ever requiring you to set foot in a gym. The deeper principle here is what behavioral scientists call habit stacking. Hinohara wasn't carving out 45 minutes a day for a workout he had to psychologically negotiate with himself to complete. He attached a health behavior to something he was already doing, moving between floors. The decision was already made. There was nothing to activate. Think about your own day. What transitions already exist between floors, between meetings, between locations that could carry a small, zero-cost physical investment? That's the question Hinohara's stair habit is actually asking you. This is the philosophical center of everything Hinohara stood for, and it challenges one of the most deeply held beliefs in modern culture, that retirement is the goal and rest is the reward. Hinohara believed, based on clinical observation across thousands of patients, that total withdrawal from structured, meaningful activity was not a rest, it was a countdown. His reasoning was grounded in what we now understand about the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for planning, decision-making, and social engagement. When that region goes consistently unstimulated, it begins to lose density and function. Cognitive decline that was gradual under conditions of engagement can accelerate sharply under conditions of purposeless idleness. He watched this pattern repeat throughout his career, patient after patient. But here's the distinction that matters. Because the work until you drop version of this philosophy is a straw man. Hinohara wasn't talking about employment. He was talking about ikigai, a Japanese concept that translates roughly to a reason to get out of bed. His ikigai happened to be medicine, writing, and mentorship. Yours might be coaching a youth sports team, teaching skills to people in your community, or building something with your hands. The form is irrelevant. The function, having something the world needs, that you are good at, that gives you a sense of meaning, is what matters neurologically and immunologically. Research on loneliness and immune function has become robust enough to enter mainstream medicine. Isolation and purposelessness are not simply sad feelings. They are physiologically measurable stressors. They elevate cortisol. They suppress natural killer cell activity. They accelerate the inflammatory processes that underlie aging at the cellular level. Hinohara's prescription for staying engaged with society wasn't philosophical luxury. It was clinical necessity. And if you're thinking, does this mean I have to stay in a job I hate? No. It means the goal of any career transition should be to move toward meaningful contribution, not away from all structure. For those already retired or approaching it, replacing employment with any form of purposeful engagement is not optional. It is a health intervention. Hinohara made an observation about children that he never stopped applying to adults. Watch a child who has just scraped their knee, they cry for a moment, but the second something genuinely interesting catches their attention, the crying stops. The pain didn't disappear, but it receded from the foreground of consciousness. His insight was that this mechanism doesn't expire with childhood. Adults who are deeply absorbed in a hobby, a creative project, or a joyful social activity experience measurable reductions in perceived pain, stress, and anxiety. The neuroscience is legitimate focused positive engagement triggers dopamine and endorphin release while simultaneously reducing activity in the brain's default mode network, the region associated with rumination, self-criticism, and stress amplification. For Hinohara, classical music was a specific tool for mental recovery and stress modulation. But the principle applies to anything: absorbing and joyful cooking, gardening, playing cards, learning an instrument, reading fiction. The key word is active. Passive consumption scrolling, background television doesn't produce the same effect. Engaged, present enjoyment does. The practical implication is this: scheduling a hobby is not laziness. It is a legitimate investment in biological age. The people who treat leisure as a reward for productivity are, ironically, aging faster than the people who treat it as a non-negotiable part of the week. By now, you have 4 principles in hand. But before you close this video and go back to your life, there are 3 beliefs most people carry that will quietly undermine every intention you've formed. The first is the genetics excuse. Genes load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Epigenetics, the science of how behavior actually switches genes on and off, is the most important public health conversation that most people have never had. Your predispositions are real, They are not your destiny. The second is the complexity illusion, the belief that simple can't possibly work. Hinohara's entire philosophy was, as some researchers have put it, stupidly simple. Vegetables, fish, movement, purpose, joy. There are no expensive protocols here. The compounding effect of basic, consistent habits over 50 years produces outcomes no supplement stack can replicate in 5. The third is the too late belief, and this one is the most dangerous. If you are 45, 55, or 65 watching this, hear this clearly. Biological age is not fixed. Research on telomere length, cardiovascular fitness, and cognitive function consistently shows that lifestyle changes made in midlife and even early old age produce measurable biological reversal. Your body is not a car accumulating permanent mileage. It is a dynamic system that responds to inputs at every age. Starting at 50 is better than starting at 60. Starting at 60 is better than never starting. 3 starter commitments. 0 cost. 0 equipment. First, the eating pause. For 1 week, stop at what feels like 70% full. Wait 3 minutes, then decide. Just practice the awareness. Second, the stare commitment. Identify 1 recurring stare opportunity in your day and commit to taking it 2 steps at a time, every single time. The rule is already made. You no longer have to decide in the moment. Third, the purpose audit. Write down 1 activity outside of paid work that the world would be slightly worse off without. If nothing comes to mind immediately, that is the most important data point this exercise could have produced. Hinohara didn't optimize his life to live as long as possible. He lived as fully as possible, and the length followed. Longevity without meaning isn't the goal. It never was. What Hinohara understood, and what most longevity content misses entirely, is that a long life is a byproduct. It is the natural output of a life spent engaged, purposeful, nourished, and joyful. You don't need a new identity. You don't need a new diet or a new gym. You need to make slightly better decisions inside the life you already have, and then repeat those decisions for the next 20 years. That's it. That's the whole thing. Simple, unglamorous, and extraordinarily powerful. Now, what's the one principle from this video you think you've been getting wrong the longest? Leave it in the comments.